This is not justice, this is pest control. On a beautiful Saturday afternoon, a decorated CIA commander, Darius Kane, was attacked by a police dog in his own front yard. His crime was the color of his skin. The racist officer next door, Officer Trent Barlow, saw a black man working in the garden of a mansion and decided he was an intruder who needed to be punished. He released his dog, expecting to terrorize another victim into submission. He thought he was taming a vagrant. In reality, he was signing the death warrant of his own career. Before we continue, comment from where you are watching this video and make sure to subscribe, because the story of this officer's downfall is one you will not want to miss. The sun warmed Darius Kane's back, a gentle caress that felt like a welcome to the neighborhood. He knelt in the rich, dark soil of his new front garden, carefully tending the rose bushes that lined the immaculate white fence. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas filled the air. This was peace. After years spent in the shadows, in dusty and dangerous corners of the world, this quiet suburban paradise was his reward. The sprawling colonial-style house rising behind him was more than mere property. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could finally put down roots. His hands, calloused and marked by a life his new neighbors could never imagine, moved with the delicate precision of a gardener. The sharp bark of a dog shattered the calm. Darius looked up, shielding his eyes from the afternoon glare. On the porch next door stood a man in a police uniform. A German shepherd strained at the leash beside him. The man had a fleshy, sunburned face and a permanent sneer on his thin lips. It was Officer Trent Barlow, his new neighbor. They had never been formally introduced, but Darius had seen him come and go, his patrol car parked like a territorial marker in the driveway. "You there?" Barlow's voice was like gravel. "What do you think you're doing?" Darius rose slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. He wore simple work clothes, a gray t-shirt stained with sweat and soil, and old cargo pants. He nodded with calm neutrality. "Just gardening. I'm the new owner." Barlow laughed, a short, ugly bark that made the dog beside him growl. "The owner? That's a good one. A guy like you doesn't own a place like this. Not in my neighborhood." The barely disguised racism was as predictable as it was pathetic. Darius had dealt with men like Barlow his entire life, insignificant men who used their badges to feel important. He kept his voice even, refusing to take the bait. "See, I assure you, the deed is in my name, Darius Kane. A pleasure to meet you." "I don't care what your name is," Barlow snapped, stepping down from the porch onto the grass that separated their properties. The dog, whose name Rex was stitched onto its tactical vest, continued to growl, eyes locked on Darius. "I see a vagrant trespassing on private property. Now put your hands up and get on the ground before I make you." Darius remained still, posture relaxed, but ready. Years of training had taught him to stay calm, to control a situation with presence alone. "Officer, I live here. My wallet and keys are inside the house. We can clear this up in 2 minutes." "I'm not asking again." Barlow's face turned red as a storm cloud. He saw Darius's refusal to cower not as the calm of an innocent man, but as the defiance of a criminal. To Barlow, a black man in this wealthy white neighborhood was an anomaly, a threat that had to be neutralized. "You're making a serious mistake, officer," Darius said, lowering his voice slightly, adopting an authoritative tone he rarely used outside of work. That was the final trigger. The hint of authority from a man Barlow considered his inferior sent a wave of rage through him. "Error!" he roared. "I'll show you an error." With a sharp command, he unleashed the dog. "Get him, Rex!" The world exploded into a frenzy of fur and teeth. The German shepherd, trained to see a target rather than a person, launched itself across the lawn. Darius's training kicked in instantly. He turned sideways toward the animal to protect his face and throat, raising his forearm as a shield. The dog's jaws clamped down with incredible force. The pain was immediate and searing, a burning agony as the teeth sank deep into the muscle and bone of his left arm. The animal's weight threw him off balance, and he crashed into the rose bushes, thorns tearing at his back and legs. The dog did not let go. It shook its head violently, ripping at his arm. Darius felt the warm rush of his own blood soaking his sleeve and dripping onto the carefully tended grass. Through the haze of pain, he saw Barlow standing there, a triumphant, sadistic smile spreading across his face. I was not going to stop the attack. He was enjoying it. He watched a man being torn apart on his own property and smiled. The peaceful suburban Saturday had become a scene of raw, primal violence. The scent of roses now mixed with the metallic taste of blood. And as the dog continued its savage assault, Darius Kane, who commanded one of the deadliest clandestine units on the planet, knew this was not merely an attack. It was a declaration of war. The agony in Darius's arm was a raging fire, but his mind remained a block of ice. His training, honed in far more extreme situations, suppressed the panic and demanded a tactical assessment. The dog was a weapon, and its handler the enemy. He used his free hand to grab the dog's collar, trying to relieve the pressure, but the animal was a whirlwind of trained aggression. Every movement he made to defend himself was met with a deeper bite, a fiercer growl. "Call it off," Darius gritted through clenched teeth. The words tasted of blood and dirt. Barlow stood with his arms crossed over his chest, the very picture of satisfaction. "He's just doing his job. Looks like you shouldn't have resisted." "Resisted? I'm in my own damn garden." Out of the corner of his eye, Darius saw curtains shifting in the windows of neighboring houses. People were watching in silent indifference. Their silence was a form of complicity, a quiet approval of Barlow's actions. They saw a police officer and his dog subduing a black man and assumed the story Barlow was creating was true. That realization fed the fury growing inside him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a second patrol car screeched to a stop at the curb. A younger, thinner officer whose badge read Vargas jumped out, eyes wide as he took in the scene. "Trent, what the hell is going on?" The suspect was trespassing on private property and became aggressive when confronted. Barlow lied smoothly, his voice carrying across the garden for the benefit of his partner and the watching neighbors. "He resisted arrest and then assaulted my dog." It was a perfectly woven lie that placed all the blame on the victim. Vargas looked away from the blood-stained grass, then at Darius still struggling with the dog, and his expression hardened into the practiced solidarity of the badge. He drew his weapon. "Let go of the dog, hands where I can see them." It was an impossible order. The dog was still locked onto his arm. Releasing it meant allowing it to tear him apart further. Seeing that his partner had aligned with him, Barlow finally gave a sharp whistle. "Rex, out!" The dog released instantly and trotted back to Barlow's side, muzzle dripping with Darius's blood. The sudden release of pressure made Darius nauseous and dizzy. His left arm was a ruin of flesh and fabric. Blood poured from the deep puncture wounds, staining the green grass a dark crimson. He staggered to his feet, trying to press the wound with his good hand. "On your knees! Hands behind your head!" Vargas shouted, weapon still aimed at Darius's chest. "He's the one who needs medical attention," Darius said through gritted teeth. "Your partner just ordered an unprovoked attack." "I heard what happened," Vargas said coldly. "You assaulted an officer's dog. That's a crime. Now get on your knees before I make you." Before Darius could protest further, Barlow stepped forward and shoved him hard in the chest. Already unbalanced and weak from blood loss, Darius collapsed onto the grass. Barlow was on him instantly, driving a knee into his back and grinding his face into the dirt. The smell of soil and his own blood filled his nose. "Like playing tough," Barlow growled, yanking Darius's good arm behind him with painful force. "Let's see how tough you are in a cell." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. They were deliberately tight, biting into his skin. Barlow hauled him up and marched him toward the patrol car. The neighbors watched from their porches and gardens, their faces reflecting fear, curiosity, and a severe, silent approval. They saw the official version of the story. A dangerous criminal had been subdued. They did not see a homeowner who had been brutally attacked in his own yard. As Barlow shoved him into the back of the patrol car, Darius's head struck the doorframe. A wave of pain exploded behind his eyes, but he made no sound. He refused to give these men that satisfaction. The door slammed shut, locking him into the narrow, molded plastic back seat. Through the window, he watched Barlow talking with Vargas, laughing as he pointed at Darius's mangled arm. Rex sat patiently in Barlow's car, panting after being rewarded for a job well done. The humiliation was physical, a burning shame almost as painful as his wounds. He was a CIA commander, a man who had negotiated with warlords and dismantled terrorist cells. And here he was, bleeding and handcuffed in the back of a small-town patrol car, arrested for the crime of gardening while black. The system he had sworn to protect in his own way had just turned against him. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving a trail of his blood on the pristine suburban street, Darius looked back at his beautiful new house, his sanctuary. Now it looked like a crime scene, and he knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The ride to the station was an exercise in petty cruelty. Barlow drove erratically, taking corners at high speed and slamming on the brakes for no reason, slamming Darius's wounded body against the hard plastic seats. The pain in his arm had settled into a deep, throbbing ache, and the tight handcuffs cut off circulation in his right hand. In the front seat, Barlow and Vargas chatted casually, punctuated by laughter. They did not speak to Darius, treating him not as a person, but as cargo. The station was a low, soulless brick building that smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and despair. Barlow dragged Darius out of the car and shoved him through the back door, straight into the booking area. A desk sergeant with a slate-like face looked up, eyes fixing on Darius's blood-soaked sleeve and torn clothing, before glancing at Barlow with a conspiratorial smile. "Got a live one, Trent?" the sergeant asked. "Just taking out the trash," Barlow answered loud enough for everyone to hear. This one thought he could move up in the world, had to teach him some local etiquette. They forced Darius onto a metal bench bolted to the floor. His requests for a lawyer and medical attention were met with mocking laughter. "We'll call you when we're done with you," Barlow said with contempt, pulling out a stack of papers. "First, let's get our story straight for the report." Darius watched with a cold, calculating mind as they constructed their fiction. He listened to Bo dictate the story of a hostile intruder who had lunged at a police dog, forcing the officers to defend their partner. Vargas, the younger officer, nodded, offering details to make the lie more convincing. Yeah, he was yelling threats, looked like he was on something. Every word was another brick in the wall they were building around him, a wall of lies designed to make him disappear into the system. Some time later, a man with gray hair and an immaculate uniform appeared in the doorway. He had the smile of a politician and the eyes of a predator. The badge on his chest read, "Chief Roland Lang." He surveyed the scene. Darius bleeding on the bench, Barlow and Vargas writing their report with complete authority. "Officer Barlow, my office," Lang said in a serene voice that carried unmistakable authority. Barlow followed him, leaving Vargas in charge of Darius. The young officer refused to make eye contact, focusing instead on a crack in the linoleum floor. Through the frosted glass of the chief's office, Darius could see their silhouettes. He could not hear the words, but he could read the body language. Lang was calm. Barlow was animated and angry. This was not a reprimand. It was a strategy session. When they emerged a short while later, Chief Lang's smile was still intact. He approached Darius, circling him slowly like a shark inspecting its prey. "Mr. Kane," he began in a deceptively pleasant tone, "it seems we have a problem. My officer reports a violent and unprovoked assault. You're looking at some very serious charges: assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and a felony charge for injuring a canine unit. That carries a considerable prison sentence in this state. Your officer is lying, Darius stated in a monotone, emotionless voice. He ordered his dog to attack me on my own property without provocation. There were witnesses. Lang gave a soft, condescending chuckle. Witnesses? I'm sure my officers have already spoken with them. I imagine they will confirm Officer Barlow's version. People around here trust their police. You see, we keep them safe from undesirable elements. The meaning was clear. The neighbors would say whatever the police told them to say. I am a homeowner and a taxpayer in this town, Darius said, locking eyes with the chief. I have rights. Rights are a curious thing, Lang said, leaning closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. They are open to interpretation, and in this town, I am the primary interpreter. He straightened and his smile faded. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit in a cell and reflect on your poor decisions. My men will finish their report, a report that will paint you as the violent aggressor you are. And tomorrow you'll see a judge who happens to be a very good friend of mine. The corruption was blatant, suffocating. This was not a single racist officer. It was a kingdom, and Lang was its king. The entire system was rigged, designed to protect its own and crush outsiders. You're making a mistake that will have unimaginable consequences, Darius said in a quiet voice that nevertheless resonated with absolute certainty. Lang's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a flash of surprise at the man's unshakable composure, but it passed quickly, replaced by amusement. A threat from a handcuffed, bleeding man. You've got guts, I'll give you that, but guts don't beat the system. He turned to Barlow. Process him. No medical attention until the paperwork is complete. Let him think about what he's done. As Barlow and Vargas dragged him toward the cells, Darius did not resist. He let them shove him into a small, filthy cell that smelled of urine and despair. The heavy metal door slammed shut, and the lock echoed with a final, definitive sound. They left him there, bleeding, alone, and stripped of his dignity. But they had not stripped him of his will. They believed they had trapped a lone animal. They had no idea they had just locked the door on a master strategist who commanded an army that officially did not exist. They thought the game was over. For Darius, it had only just begun. The cell was a concrete box designed to break a man's spirit. A single metal slab served as a bed, and a foul-smelling toilet was tucked into a corner. The only light came from a flickering fluorescent bulb in the hallway that cast long, distorted shadows through the bars. The throbbing in Darius's arm was a constant, grim reminder of the afternoon's brutality. He could feel the blood, now sticky and dried, matting the hair on his arm. They had taken his belt and shoelaces, but in their haste and arrogance, they had not found the small waterproof pouch sewn into the waistband of his pants. He sat on the cold metal bunk, controlling his breathing and slowing his heart rate. He was no longer merely a victim. He was an operator in a hostile environment. He cataloged every detail, the patrol patterns of the guards, the location of the security cameras, most of which appeared old and poorly maintained, the sounds of the station settling into the night shift. He was building a mental map, assessing his resources. Hours passed. The initial adrenaline faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a contained rage that burned like a slow fire. Finally, late in the evening, Officer Vargas appeared at the cell door. The young officer's face was a mask of indifference, but his eyes darted nervously. "You've got a phone call," Vargas said in a monotone. He opened the cell and led Darius to a grimy telephone bolted to the wall in the booking area. 5 minutes, local calls only. Barlow and the desk sergeant watched from across the room with smug expressions. They expected him to call a lawyer who would be evasive, or a family member who would panic. They wanted to witness his desperation. They would be disappointed. Darius lifted the receiver. The plastic was sticky. He turned his back to the officers, shielding the keypad with his body. He did not dial a local number. He dialed a long, complex satellite number, a number that bypassed all conventional networks, a number that did not officially exist. It was a direct line to an encrypted, secure server buried deep inside a clandestine CIA facility in Virginia. The line connected instantly. There was no ring, only a soft click followed by silence. Darius spoke in a low, calm voice with no trace of distress. It was a coded message, a series of seemingly innocuous phrases that would be completely meaningless to anyone listening. "This is Nomad," he began, using his old field call sign. "I need a weather report for Blue Ridge, expecting a sudden cold front. Send a package to Post Office Box 781. He paused, listening to the silence on the other end, confirming an asset was compromised at coordinate Delta 9. Repeat, Delta 9er requesting immediate pest control. Another pause. "The package should be addressed to Mr. Franklin, and tell him the wild roses aren't thriving this season." He hung up. The call had lasted less than 30 seconds. He turned to face the officers. Barlow was smiling. "That was quick. Couldn't find anyone to bail out a piece of trash like you?" Darius said nothing. He simply held Barlow's gaze with absolute calm, an unsettling stillness that seemed to unnerve the officer. Vargas led him back to the cell. The heavy door closed again with a metallic clang. Back in the darkness, Darius leaned against the cold wall. The message had been sent. Nomad was the distress signal. Blue Ridge was the designated operational region. Cold Front was the code for a serious, unauthorized threat against a high-ranking officer. Post Office Box 781 was Officer Trent Barlow's badge number. Delta 9er was the code for a corrupt local law enforcement agency, and Pest Control was the directive. It was not a request for rescue. It was not a request for legal assistance. It was a green light for his unit, a clandestine team of former Special Forces operators, intelligence analysts, and hackers known simply as Spectre, to come to this town and surgically dismantle the entire corrupt structure from the shadows. Mr. Franklin was the call sign of his second-in-command, a man named Quentin Reeves, and the message about the wild roses was personal. It was a signal to Quentin that this was not just business. The enemy had spilled blood. Across the country, in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Langley, alarms that had remained silent for years began to flash on a secure terminal. A senior analyst saw the decoded message and felt his blood run cold. He picked up the red phone. Within minutes, a ghost unit the world did not know existed was mobilizing. They were coming not with warrants or badges, but with satellite surveillance, cyber warfare capabilities, and operators capable of moving silently. In his filthy cell, Darius closed his eyes. The pain in his arm was still there, but now it felt distant. He could hear the ticking of the clock on the outer wall, for Chief Lang and Officer Barlow. It was the sound of another quiet night in their small, corrupt kingdom. For Darius, it was the sound of a countdown, and the clock had just reached 0. While Darius sat in his cell, a silent and invisible storm gathered over the town of Oak Creek. The activation of Spectre was an unusual and serious event. The unit operated outside the normal chain of command, answering only to a handful of people at the highest levels of the CIA and directly to Darius himself. They were the agency's problem solvers, the ones called when diplomacy failed and plausible deniability was paramount. In a mobile command center, camouflaged as a long-haul cargo truck parked at a rest area some distance away, Quentin Reeves, call sign Franklin, coordinated the initial response. Quentin was a master strategist, a man capable of seeing every angle on a chessboard that stretched across continents. His face darkened as he read the decrypted transcript of Darius's call. Pest control meant one thing. The target could not be negotiated with. It had to be eradicated. "Sophia, what do you have for me?" Quentin asked into his headset. A young woman with sharp eyes and fingers flying across multiple keyboards answered without looking up. Sophia was his lead technical analyst and a hacker who was already inside the system. Quentin, it's a joke. Municipal servers with firewalls a teenager could crack. I'm pulling everything. Personnel files, incident reports, internal emails, body camera recordings, whatever exists. Focus on Barlow, Trent, badge number 781, and his commanding officer, Chief Roland Lang, Quentin ordered. I want to know everything. Where he eats, where he sleeps, every complaint ever filed against him, every dollar he's ever taken under the table. Sophia confirmed. Initial psychological profile on Barlow shows classic narcissistic personality disorder with clear racial bias. Multiple excessive force complaints dismissed internally. He's a bully with a badge. Meanwhile, 2 other members of the team were already in motion. Shadow and Ghost, a former Delta Force operator and a former Navy SEAL respectively, were the unit's field agents. They moved through the darkness in an unmarked civilian vehicle equipped with technology that made them ghosts. As they approached the target residence, Shadow reported in a low, monotone voice while deploying a scope. He slowed as they passed Barlow's house. Ghost, in the passenger seat, casually tossed a small object that looked like a rock into the bushes near Barlow's front window. It was not a rock. It was a high-resolution audio and video device with a battery life measured in weeks. They did the same at Chief Lang's house and at the station itself, placing tiny, undetectable listening devices at key points. Within an hour, Spectre had eyes and ears throughout Oak Creek. Back in the command truck, Sophia's screens filled with data. Quentin, this goes beyond Barlow. Chief Lang is the cancer. I'm seeing patterns of evidence tampering, falsified reports, and civil asset forfeiture abuse going back years. He's been targeting minority families, seizing their property on flimsy pretexts, and selling it to a local real estate developer he's in business with. The department is a piggy bank for him and his inner circle. And Barlow's history? Quentin asked. Worse than we thought, Sophia answered, voice tight with disgust. He has a track record with that canine unit. At least 5 documented cases of suspects suffering injuries during arrest that matched dog bites. All Black or Latino men. All charges eventually dropped for lack of evidence after they spent time in jail. But the message was sent. He uses that dog to terrorize people. Quentin clenched his jaw. The reference to the wild roses in Darius's message now made perfect sense. It had been a personal attack in a place Darius considered sacred. Shadow, I need eyes on the Kane residence, Quentin ordered. Secure the perimeter. No one in or out without my clearance. I want thermal satellite imagery of the entire block. Identify which neighbors were watching and dig into their digital footprints. We need to know who is a potential witness and who is a potential threat. Understood, Shadow's voice replied. Perimeter secure. We're invisible. The Spectre team worked with terrifying efficiency. They were a force of nature, gathering information that would normally take a traditional FBI investigation months to obtain. They cross-referenced financial records, extracted cell phone location data, and even accessed the city's traffic camera network. They built a web of evidence linking Barlow and Lang to a vast conspiracy of corruption, racism, and abuse of power. By dawn, they had the complete picture. They knew every dirty secret, every illegal deal, and every act of brutality Barlow and his cronies had committed over the years. They had enough evidence to put the entire command staff of the Oak Creek Police Department away for life. But Darius had not requested arrests. He had requested pest control. That meant the mission was not merely about revealing the truth. It was about setting a trap. It was about letting the arrogant, overconfident predators of Oak Creek walk straight into a cage they themselves had built, a cage from which there would be no escape. And Quentin Reeves knew exactly how to build it. He only needed the prey to take the bait. The sun rose over Oak Creek, and its golden light did nothing to dispel the ugliness gathering inside the town's police department. Inside the station, Officer Trent Barlow felt triumphant. He swaggered into the break room, pouring himself a cup of coffee that had been burning for hours. Chief Lang was already there, reading the morning paper with an air of smug satisfaction. "Morning, Chief," Barlow said with a wide smile. "Sleep like a baby, Trent," Lang replied, folding the paper. "I hear our guest in cell block B had a rough night. Hasn't even touched breakfast. He'll learn his place soon enough." Barlow chuckled, taking a loud sip of his coffee. "They all do eventually. Come in here with their attitudes, thinking they're better than everyone else. A few hours in a cage and a felony charge hanging over their heads usually sorts it out." They were completely at ease, speaking freely in a room they considered safe. They had no idea that a tiny listening device no larger than a grain of rice was fixed to the underside of the table, transmitting every self-incriminating word directly to the Spectre command truck. Quentin and Sophia listened with grim faces. "Record everything," Quentin said quietly. "This is the nail in their coffin." "You should have seen his face when Rex got him," Barlow continued, voice filled with sadistic glee. "Priceless. I've been waiting years to do that to one of these arrogant bastards. Moves into a mansion in my neighborhood, thinks he can just intimidate me. No, sir." "You handled it perfectly, Trent," Lang said with false praise. "The report is solid: trespassing, resisting, assault on a police dog. The prosecutor will love it. By the time this guy gets a public defender, he'll be begging for a plea deal. We'll make sure he loses that house in the process. Civil forfeiture is a beautiful thing." "You think he'll fight it?" Barlow asked. "Let him try," Lang scoffed. "Who's a judge going to believe? A decorated officer and his chief, or some thug with a made-up story? The judges are in our pocket. The district attorney is in our pocket. He has no idea what he's up against. This is our town." The conversation continued, a cascade of casual corruption. They laughed about previous victims, people they had framed, intimidated, or whose property they had seized. They joked about the Thompson kid, a teenager Barlow had beaten during a traffic stop, and how they had lost the body camera footage. They talked about shaking down local merchants for donations to the police charity fund, which was little more than Lang's personal slush fund. Sophia typed furiously, creating time-stamped transcripts and cross-referencing their boasts with the evidence she had already pulled from their servers. Every word was another charge, another year on a future sentence. "So what's the plan for Kane today?" Barlow asked. "What do you think?" Lang said. "We'll forget to schedule his arraignment until this afternoon. Let him sit in that filth. Let him think about how his life is over. When he's broken enough, we'll offer him a deal. He pleads guilty, we seize the property, and we recommend a lighter sentence. He'll take it. And if he doesn't," Lang's smile was chilling, "then he'll have an accident in the county jail. Things happen. Inmates fight. It's a dangerous place for someone who doesn't know the rules." The threat was clear and unambiguous. They were not merely corrupt. They were willing to commit murder to protect their kingdom. Sophia looked at Quentin, eyes wide. "They're planning to kill him." "They won't get the chance," Quentin said in an icy voice. "It's time to get our man out of there." He opened a secure communication line. "Shadow, it's time for Phase 2. I'm transferring the bail money through a shell company. A bondsman will arrive shortly. I need you watching Darius the moment he steps out of that building. Do not lose sight of him for a second. Clear?" "Crystal," came the reply. Quentin leaned back in his chair, listening to the two corrupt officers laugh and joke in the break room. Their arrogance was astonishing. They believed themselves untouchable gods in their little kingdom, completely unaware that a far greater power was watching, listening, and preparing to pass judgment. They thought they were celebrating a victory. In reality, they were delivering their own eulogy. The bail bondsman was a professional, a discreet ghost contractor hired for situations like this. He walked into the Oak Creek police station with a briefcase and a no-nonsense demeanor. presenting the paperwork for the release of Darius Kane. The desk sergeant, surprised that the vagrant had managed to post the high bail so quickly, grumbled but processed the release. Darius was escorted from his cell. His face was an unreadable mask. His clothes were stiff with dried blood, and the pain in his arm was a persistent, tearing agony. But he walked with his back straight and his step firm. They handed him his personal effects in a plastic bag. As he signed the final form, his eyes met Barlow's across the booking room. Barlow gave him a slow, mocking smile, a look that said, "You're out for now, but you still belong to me." Darius did not react. He simply turned and walked out the main door into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. The outside world felt strange after the dim confinement of the cell. He paused on the steps and drew a deep breath. A black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. Ghost was behind the wheel. The rear door opened silently. Darius climbed in without a word, and the car pulled smoothly away from the station. "How are the wounds, sir?" Shadow asked from the passenger seat, scanning the street. "I'll manage," Darius said at last, allowing the tension to leave his shoulders. "I need a doctor, not an emergency room. Take me to the safe house." From his position in a parked van across the street, Officer Barlow watched the sedan disappear. He was furious. Someone had bailed Kane out, and with a substantial sum. It did not fit the narrative of a low-level criminal. A seed of unease was planted, but his arrogance quickly smothered it. So the man had a rich friend. It didn't matter. This was still his town. Fear needed to be reinforced. He needed to pay Mr. Kane a personal visit to remind him who was in charge. Some time later, Darius sat in a clean, sterile room in a nondescript safe house on the outskirts of town. A doctor, another Spectre team member, cleaned and sutured the deep wounds on his arm. "Multiple deep punctures into the tissue," the doctor reported clinically. "Mild nerve damage, but it should heal. You're lucky it missed the brachial artery. You'll need antibiotics and a tetanus shot." While the doctor worked, Quentin Reeves briefed Darius via video conference. "We have everything, Darius. Hours of recordings, financial records, falsified reports. We have enough to launch a full-scale federal investigation into Oak Creek. The Department of Justice would have a field day with this." "That's not enough," Darius said in a cold voice. "I don't want them tangled in paperwork and legal battles for years. I don't want them walking on a technicality. This has to be decisive. It has to be a lesson." "What do you propose?" Quentin asked, already knowing the answer. "Barlow is arrogant. He thinks he's broken me. He thinks I'm alone and scared. He won't be able to resist coming to my house to gloat, to intimidate me further. He'll want to see me shrink in fear." Darius looked directly into the camera. "And we're going to let him." A slow smile spread across Quentin's face. "You want to draw him onto your territory." "Exactly," Darius confirmed. "He thinks my house is a crime scene. I'm going to turn it into a cage." The plan moved at lightning speed. While Darius rested, the rest of the Spectre team converged on his house. They moved like ghosts, sweeping the property for any hidden microphones Barlow might have planted. Their initial scan showed nothing. Barlow was too much of a thug and not enough of a spy for that. They installed their own covert cameras, covering every angle inside and outside the house. Shadow and Ghost took sniper positions in the wooded area behind the property, watching. The rest of the tactical team positioned themselves inside the house, hidden in the shadows, waiting. Later that night, dressed in clean clothes, his arm bandaged and in a sling, Darius returned home. The black sedan dropped him off and drove away, creating the illusion that he was alone. He walked slowly up his driveway, pretending to glance over his shoulder nervously. He fumbled with the keys at the front door, feigning shock and fear. He left the curtains partially open. Inside, he sat in the living room with a single lamp lit, making himself visible. He did not have to wait long. Just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, he saw it. The familiar Oak Creek Police patrol car cruised slowly down the street. It parked directly in front of his house. Officer Trent Barlow stepped out. He was not in uniform. He wore jeans and a tight black polo that strained against his paunch. His face radiated confidence as he crossed the street. He was a predator, savoring the fear of his wounded prey. He walked up the driveway, boots crunching on the gravel, completely unaware that he was walking into the center of a perfectly executed ambush. I was about to knock on the door of the most dangerous man he had ever met, and he believed he held all the power. Darius watched on a small tablet displaying feeds from a dozen hidden cameras as Barlow approached the front door. His arrogance was infuriating. He walked as if the ground beneath Darius's feet belonged to him. Barlow did not bother to knock. He simply turned the knob and, finding it unlocked, as Darius had deliberately left it, pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Leaving the door unlocked, Kane?" Barlow's voice echoed through the silent house, thick with condescending threat. "Not very smart. In a neighborhood like this, you never know what kind of trash might walk in." He closed the door behind him. The soft click resonated in the entryway. The house was silent. Barlow's eyes swept the immaculate living room, taking in the elegant furniture and the expensive artwork on the walls. His expression soured with envy and resentment. "Nice place," he said with contempt. "Bet it cost a fortune. You'll enjoy the memories from your cell." Darius stepped out of the hallway leading from the kitchen. He was no longer playing the victim. His posture was upright, his gaze cold and hard as shards of obsidian, and the sling that had covered his arm was gone. The authority he had suppressed since arriving in this town now radiated from him in palpable waves. Barlow was stunned for an instant. The fearful, broken man he had expected to find had vanished. In his place stood someone entirely different, someone calm and dangerous. But his arrogance reasserted itself quickly. "There you are," he said, taking another step into the room. "I just came by to make sure you understood the situation. You're going to lose this house. You're going to lose your freedom. But if you behave and sign the right papers, maybe I can talk to the district attorney about being lenient." It was a classic intimidation tactic, one final turn of the screw. "You walked into my house, Officer Barlow," Darius said in a dangerously quiet voice. "Threatening a man you've already arrested is highly irregular." "I go where I want, when I want," Barlow retorted, puffing out his chest. "This is my town, my rules, and you broke them the second you showed up here. I'm just here to collect the fine." "You collect nothing," Darius declared. "You're a corrupt, racist bully who uses his badge as a shield for his own pathetic insecurities. You prey on the weak because you're terrified of the strong." Barlow's face contorted with rage. "You son of a—" He lunged forward, reaching for Darius, but he never made it. From the shadows of the dining room, the kitchen, and the top of the stairs, figures emerged. They were silent, dressed in black tactical gear, with faces hidden by balaclavas. Each held a suppressed, state-of-the-art rifle. The red laser sight of every weapon painted a single, unwavering dot on Barlow's chest. Barlow froze mid-step, eyes wide with disbelief and sudden absolute terror. He looked desperately around the room. There were 6, no, 8. They had appeared from nowhere, as if materializing from the air itself. What is this?" he stammered as his bravado evaporated like mist. "Who the hell are you people?" The men did not answer. They simply stood there, weapons ready. A silent, lethal tribunal. Darius took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them until he was inches from the terrified officer. "You asked me who I was, Trent," Darius said in a low, chilling voice. "You said you knew. You saw a black man in a nice house, and your small, prejudiced mind filled in the blanks. A criminal, a thug, a vagrant." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, discreet black credentials case. He opened it. On one side was a photo identification bearing his name, Darius Kane. On the other was a gold seal, the emblem of the CIA, and beneath it, his title, Commander, Special Activities Division. Barlow stared at the identification, mouth open. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and sickly. The laser dots on his chest seemed to burn brighter. "You thought this was your town," Darius continued, a note of contempt in his voice. "You thought you made the rules. You were wrong. You're a pest, Trent, a parasite that's been allowed to spread for far too long, and I was sent here to take care of you." Barlow's body began to tremble. This is illegal. You can't. I'm a police officer." "You lost that title the moment you became a criminal," Darius said coldly. He nodded toward Quentin Reeves, who had stepped out of the kitchen holding a tablet that displayed a live feed from the station break room, where Chief Lang was being held at gunpoint by another Spectre team. "Every word you and your chief have said over the past day has been recorded," Darius informed him. "Every crime you bragged about, every life you ruined. It's all here. Your kingdom is gone. Your rules no longer apply." He stepped even closer, locking eyes with Barlow, and delivered the final devastating line. "This is not justice," he whispered. "This is pest control." Barlow's legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor in a pathetic heap. The powerful, intimidating officer had vanished, replaced by a terrified man who had just realized he had picked a fight with a power so incomprehensible he might as well have tried to punch the sun. The trap had sprung. The predator was caged. The demolition was swift, silent, and ruthlessly efficient. While Barlow whimpered on the floor of Darius's living room, a similar scene unfolded across town. At the Oak Creek Police Department, Chief Lang was in his office finalizing the fraudulent charges against Darius when the door burst open. Before he could even reach the panic button under his desk, 3 Spectre operators had secured him. They pulled a black hood over his head, silencing his indignant protests. They zip-tied him and took him out a rear door without anyone seeing. Simultaneously, Officer Vargas and the corrupt desk sergeant were intercepted on their way home. Their cars were boxed in by nondescript black vans, and they were taken with the same silent, overwhelming force. Within minutes, the entire corrupt inner circle of the Oak Creek Police Department had been neutralized and transferred to an undisclosed federal detention facility, far from their sphere of influence. They simply disappeared. The next morning, the town of Oak Creek woke to a state of confusion that quickly turned to shock. The police station was surrounded not by local officers, but by FBI agents in tactical vests and federal marshals. Black SUVs and armored vehicles lined the streets. A press release from the Department of Justice announced that the entire command staff of the Oak Creek Police Department had been taken into federal custody as part of a sweeping RICO investigation into systemic corruption, civil rights violations, and organized crime. The news hit the town like thunder. For years, residents, particularly those in minority communities, had suffered under the department's oppression. They had been harassed, framed, and robbed with impunity. Their complaints had been ignored, their voices silenced. Now, overnight, the tyrants were gone. The evidence gathered by Spectre, stripped of any connection to the CIA and delivered anonymously to a carefully selected, trusted team at the Department of Justice, was overwhelming and irrefutable. It included the audio recordings of Barlow and Lang bragging about their crimes, the financial records detailing their illegal seizures and bribes, and the digital proof of their evidence tampering. There would be no trials that dragged on for years. There would be guilty pleas and long prison sentences. Darius stood by the window of his living room, watching the news on the television. The bandage on his arm was a hard reminder of the battle he had just won. Quentin Reeves stood beside him with a tablet. "It's done, Darius," Quentin said. "The entire network is dismantled. The feds are reopening dozens of old cases based on our information. Innocent people will be exonerated." "And Barlow?" Darius asked quietly. "He's singing like a canary," Quentin answered with a grim smile, "trying to cut a deal. He's giving up everyone and everything to save his own skin. He doesn't realize there is no deal to be made. He's looking at life in a maximum security federal prison. He will never see the light of day as a free man again. Darius nodded slowly, feeling a deep satisfaction. It was not triumph or joy. It was the calm, heavy sense of necessary work completed. He looked out at his garden, the rose bushes that had been the backdrop to so much brutality. He knew he could never see this place as the sanctuary of peace he had longed for. It would always be a battlefield. Later that week, a public town meeting was held. It was packed. People who had lived in fear for decades stood one by one, sharing their stories of abuse at the hands of Barlow, Lang, and their cronies. The tears shed were not only of sorrow for the past, but of relief for the future. They were free. Darius watched the live stream of the meeting online, preferring to remain in the shadows. His role in this was finished. He was a ghost, and ghosts do not take credit. He had come to this town seeking peace and had found violence. In return, he had brought not vengeance, but a reckoning. High had held up a mirror to a corrupt system, and the reflection had shattered it. As he packed a small suitcase, preparing to leave the house forever and return to the shadows where he belonged, he knew this victory was bittersweet. The world was full of men like Barlow and Lang. The fight never truly ended. But in one small town, a deep, festering wound had been cauterized. The cancer had been cut out. And sometimes that was the only victory one could ask for. He closed the door of the house for the last time. The soft click resonated like a final, decisive judgment. The struggle for justice is often a long and brutal war, fought not only in the courts, but in the quiet moments of defiance against those who believe their power makes them invincible. Darius Kane did not seek this battle, but when it came to his door, he met it with the full force of a life spent in the shadows, fighting for a world that rarely knew of his existence. The scars on his arm would fade, but the change he brought to that small town would endure, a testament that no one, no matter how powerful they appear, is exempt from a reckoning. He cleaned out the rot not for glory or gratitude, but because it was the right thing to do. And in a world drowning in darkness, sometimes it is enough to light a single fire of justice. What did you think of Darius's method of achieving justice? Was it a necessary response to a completely broken system? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.